Hello and welcome to another lawnfawn video. Today we're taking a look at the new Anglerfish FlipFlop stamp set and coordinating die. So let's take a look at these stamps. First we have this Anglerfish FlipFlop, some little bubbles, a stamp that stamps out the little shine from the anglerfish's light, and you can see what that looks like without the light there, a little open heart, and a solid heart. There's also a little stamp that says push here if you're going to make a light up card. The sentiment in this set says a card to brighten your day. Now this fish is a flip-flop of the Anglerfish in the Your Sublime set, so I'm going to stamp this fish out as well, and you can see the two together. You can use that little shine stamp to stamp the shine around either light for either fish. Now let's add some color to these cute little anglerfish. For the one on the right, which is the flip-flop, I'm using some YR colors. So I started with my mid color as my shading and my dark color. I've blended it out with the light. Then I added that mid color again and blended it once more. And then I will pull out a darker shade and add some little dots, which is a really fun way to add some texture to this fish. Now for my other fish, which is the fish that we stamped from the Your Sublime set, I'm coloring this in some purples. So I started with the V15 for the darker color and my shading around the outside. And then I'm blending out with the V12, and then I'll come in with that V17, which is the darker purple, and add some little dots for texture as well. And for the bubbles, I'll just color those in really simply. And if you wanted to add some shading, I'm pulling in a slightly darker color just for the bottom of the bubbles. For the heart, I will just color it solid pink, and of course I can't forget the little lights. Now there are coordinating dies that you can bend apart or snip with your wire snips, and they will line up perfectly with this little stamp set. And I will cut these out and use these in a card here in just a little bit. But first, let's take a look at the new Tiny Gift Box Anglerfish AddOn. This new add-on die works with the original Tiny Gift Box die. And here are all the pieces laid out and cut. So you have a piece that cuts the face, the sides, some pieces for the little spots, and then the eyes and the teeth, and then lots of fins for the tail, the top, and the sides. And then of course there is the little light up lure that goes on his head. So we're going to cut out a tiny gift box from some matching purple cardstock, and you fold this on all the score lines that the die creates. Once you have all of those score lines folded, you can put some adhesive on 4 of these little tabs. Pull off the liner paper from those pieces of adhesive, and then you're going to fold this up and create the box. So if you fold this up and attach it to the sides of the box, do the same on the other side, and then you can just fold those little flaps in and push in the tab to create the top of the box. Now let's create the face for our anglerfish. So we have this lighter purple color. This is that sort of arched piece without the notch. That will color in his spots at the top of his head. This piece in the center that has a notch going in, that is for the eyes. And then the one with the notch going out, that is for the teeth. And this way they all fit together perfectly on the back of the face. So you can see there how all of those fit together just perfectly, and then when you flip it over, all of those open cut areas will be filled in with the correct colors. Then you can just add some adhesive to the back and add this directly to the front of the box. Next, we can do the sides of the box, and you can use that same arched piece to fill in the spots on the sides as well. Even though the top of these sides is not curved like the head, it will fit in there perfectly. All you have to do is line up the top of the arch with the top of the side. And we'll do this to both sides. And when you flip it over, you'll see that those little spots that the die cuts out are filled in perfectly. Now we want to add the small fins to each side. There is a little slit that the die cuts. You can just push that open with a piercing tool, add a little bit adhesive on the back, and you can see that the fin is meant to be towards the front of the box, towards the face. So this one happens to be the left side of the box. And then you'll just tuck that small fin into that little slit and sort of bend it out a little bit so you have some dimension. Then you can just add adhesive all over the side of the box or the back of this piece and adhere this to the side of the box. And you have that cute little fin sticking out, which I just think is so fun. So we'll do the same thing to the other side. Just add a little bit of adhesive on the back so that that fin has something to stick to. Open up that slit with a piercing tool so you can fit that little fin in there. And then you slide it with the small part facing towards the front of the fish and the wide part of the fin facing out, and just bend that out a little bit to get some dimension. And then just adhere this to the other side of the box. And I just think that this is shaping up to be super cute with those little fins sticking out on each side. But we're not done yet. We need to use these two pieces. They have a score line in the center, two score lines that the die creates, and you want to fold on both of those, creating a little flat piece between them. So we have the piece that Rebecca just folded in half. Here on this piece, this is the one that goes on the head, and she's showing you those two score lines that the die creates that you want to fold on both of those. And you'll see why here in just a second, because that's where we're going to put our adhesive to adhere these to the box. So you can see that kind of creates a little flat place in the middle. You're going to take that 1/8 inch adhesive tape, add a little bit of adhesive to the area between those two score lines, pull off that liner paper, and then this one will go on the head, kind of like a mohawk, which is really fun and cute. And that will allow the two sides of the fin to stick up. And then you'll do the same to the tail. Just fold it to where that flat part, where the adhesive is, can be stuck to the box, and then there you have the cute little tail on the back. And you do want to make sure that that tail is adhered below the little thumb notch so that you can open the box for whatever treats you put inside. And then finally, to finish off our anglerfish, we need to add the little lure that comes from the front of its head with the little glowing light at the end. The die cuts two of these, one going in each direction. You want to add a little dot of glue to each of them on that round part, and then add the little glowing dot, which we have cut from yellow cardstock here. So each of these will be opposite each other. Then you'll take the other end of this and fold it out. So fold it towards the side with the dot. Next, you want to sandwich these two pieces together. So add a little bit of adhesive and layer them right on top of each other to where the yellow dot that we added is on the outside of both pieces, and the part that we folded folds away from each other, creating a little flat area. Now to adhere this to our anglerfish, we want to take a little glue dot and add it to that flat area that's created by the pieces that fold out and away from this lure. Then you can just add it to the forehead of our little anglerfish right there on the front panel, and now he's all complete. How cute is this little guy? I think it would be really fun to make a bunch of these in all the colors of the rainbow. Now I'm going back to the stamped anglerfish that I colored earlier, and I'm going to create a card with them. I have a piece of Bristol cardstock cut with the largest of the stitch rectangle stackables, and I will be doing some ink blending on this. I also cut a piece of kraft cardstock with that same die and used the stitched wavy border to cut the top. So for my background, I'm going all over with some salvaged patina distress ink, and then I'm pulling in some peacock feathers distress ink around the edges and the top corners to just darken it up a little bit on the outside. I didn't have to ink all the way to the bottom because that sand is going to cover up the bottom. Once I have this looking the way I want with the color, I'm adding some droplets of some clean water. So I've just picked up some water with my paintbrush and I'm just tapping that. Then I'm going to lay a clean paper towel over top and pick up those water droplets, and it will remove some of the ink as I do this, and I'll get this nice splatter water look. Next, I'm going to add some underwater plants, and one of my favorite ways to do this is with the bayou backdrop, or in this case, the bayou stencil. So I've added my sand at the bottom so I know where to place my stencil. And I'm starting with the stencil that is just the leaves, using some Uncharted Mariner Distress Oxide ink to add these leaves to my background. Since I'm using the oxide ink, this is going to sit on top of the ink that I've already put down and give it a really cool look. And it doesn't matter if I go off the stencil at the bottom, again, that will be covered up by that kraft piece with the sand. Now I'm going to grab the second stencil in the stencil set, which is the little vines that the leaves hang off of. Of course, this is upside down from the way we would normally use it, so they look more like trunks of trees coming up to grab the leaves. And I'll be using some Villainous Potion Distress Oxide for these. So this is a dark purple color. Again, using the oxide will make these colors sit on top of the background colors and really stand out. And I really love how these turned out. I think that these were some really great colors to pick, and I will definitely be using this color combo again. Now that my stenciling is done, I can go ahead and add my metallic splatters to the background. For this card, I'm using the white metallic so that it still has the look of the ocean, but you get those catches of light in that background, just like you would in the water. And I did a lot of tiny splatters all over this one, but I really like the way that it turned out. Now to do some inking on my sand. This was cut from that kraft cardstock with that stitch wavy border, and I'm starting out with tea dye distress ink for a lighter brown, pulling that down from the top edge. Then I'll go in with some vintage photo, which is a bit darker, and add some darkness to the very top edge. And of course we can't have sand without some splatters and texture, so I'm using Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide ink, added a little bit of water, and I'm just using that for my splatters on my sand. I always like to add some white splatters as well when I'm doing sand so that I have two colors of dots to create that texture. Now that my background is all nice and dry, I'm just adding this to a card base. And then before I put my sand on there, I am going to stamp the sentiment that says "A card to brighten your day." And this is, of course, from that Anglerfish FlipFlop stamp set. I'm adding my sand with some foam tape so that it is popped up a little bit off that background. And then I have colored and cut out a whole bunch of shells from the How You Bean Seashell add-on, and I will be putting those along the bottom. This idea was inspired by Lynette, who added some seashells to her anglerfish card, and I just thought that that was a great idea. I did color these in lots of colorful colors because I knew that I would have a lot of blue in my background. Once I have my arrangement down, I'm just adding a few of these with some liquid glue to the sand. And then for that starfish and that auger shell, I'll just pop those up with a little bit of thin foam adhesive just so they are a little bit popped up from the shells that are tucked behind them. Next, I need to add my little anglerfish, but I wanted to stamp that little shine stamp around their lights first. So what I did was just make two little dots with my pencil where their lights fall. And I'll use that as a guide for my stamping. And I'm just stamping in black directly onto the background, making sure that little pencil dot is in the center of my stamp. Then I can add my fish with some foam adhesive squares and just make sure that the little light ends up where my dot was. I have some little hearts cut from some guava cardstock and I'm just adding those around. And then of course, an underwater scene is the perfect time to add some bubble embellishments. So I have some iridescent bubbles that I've just sprinkled around that I'm going back through and picking them up and adding them with a little bit of liquid glue. I've got my Stardust stickles. I'm adding some glitter to my hearts and of course to the lights on my anglerfish, a little bit to the top of them, and then I'll add some glitter accents to the shells so that I have lots of sparkle on this card. And then here is my finished card with that Anglerfish FlipFlop, as well as the coordinating anglerfish from Sublime. Next, I'm recreating a card that Grace made, and I am using some mermaid cardstock, peacock cardstock, and kraft cardstock. All of these were cut with the largest of the outside in stitched rectangles, and then I'm using one of the stitched hillsides to cut the top of the kraft cardstock to make my sand. One of the really fun things about Grace's card is she used one of the stitched ends to create a little opening for her anglerfish to peek out of. So I'm just lining it up on that mermaid cardstock where I want that opening to be. I'll just hold this in place with a little bit of tape and run this through my die cut machine. And then I will have this opening that you see the darker color through and my anglerfish can peep out of. Now for my sand, I'm kind of doing as I did before, using some tea dye ink first, and then I'll go back in with that vintage photo, which is a bit darker. But instead of adding splatters to this sand, I'm going to use a Copic marker and just add some little dots to the sand. So this is just a different way that you can add texture. If you're not into splattering and you think it's too messy, you can always just add some random dots with a Copic marker. Next, I need to do a bunch of ink blending. So Grace started out with the mermaid cardstock, so you have a base light color. And then I'm going in with some peacock ink and darkening it up around all the edges. This is just a different way to get that ink blended background. You don't have to always start with a white piece of paper. You can start with a colored piece of cardstock too. And we're going to be doing a lot of stamping on this background too. Now I've moved on to the piece of peacock cardstock, and it will be what is behind the opening that I just created in the mermaid cardstock. And I'm using the sunray backdrop stencil to create some cool looking rays of light in this opening. I'm starting out with some forget-me-not ink and just inking up those rays in the center where you will see it through that opening cut in the piece in front. Then I'm also using some Blue Jay ink to darken it up just a bit more. And when I pull the stencil off, you'll see these really fun rays in the two different colors. Now it is kind of stark between those two colors, so I'm going back with that forget-me-not ink and just adding a little bit more darkness to the bottom of those rays to kind of give it a darkness at the bottom of the opening. I'm using my white watercolor paint to add some tiny little white splatters to the peacock cardstock as well as the mermaid cardstock. So we get all this texture of an underwater scene. And now to do some stamping. I'm using some peacock ink and some stamps from the Mermaid For You stamp set. I have this little school of fish as well as the single fish. And I'm just stamping that across the top. Then at the bottom I need to stamp some seaweed. So I'm just lining up my sand. I shifted it down just slightly and drew a pencil line. Now this pencil line will get hidden behind that sand, but I can use it as a guide to stamp my coral. So I'm using peacock for these two pieces, freshly cut grass for the seaweed, and then mermaid for the other coral. And these will kind of get covered up and start to fade into the background a little bit, but it adds even more interest to this card, and I think it was a really fun idea and look that Grace did. Now to move on to my anglerfish. I cut all my pieces from some Nina white cardstock, and I'm going to ink blend on all of these. Grace had a really fun color combination. She started out with the Peachy Keen ink for her lightest color. Then she used some bubble gum. And I'm just pulling that up from the bottom so that my lighter color is on top of his head. And while I've got the bubble gum out, I will add some to the fins as well, kind of towards the center part, because I'm going to work my way out to the darker areas on the outside edge. And then for the little fins, I did pull out my little finger dauber brush because they were really small. Next, I'm moving on to some plastic flamingo, which is a very bright pink. You can see how this really gives it a lot of pop of color. And I'll add that same pink flamingo to the fins as well. And then the final color that I'm just going to add a little hint of on the edges is Juice Box, which is a purple color. And this added purple just right on the edges really made this pop. And then I'm adding some to that large fin. I really only need to do one side of this because I'm going to cut it in half and only use one part of it. And then I just added some of that purple just barely to the bottom of the anglerfish's head. Now I also need to color the little lure part, so I'm doing the same to that out of that Juice Box ink. And then I wanted his spots to be that same Juice Box color, so I'm just ink blending that directly onto that piece that layers behind the spots. Now since my other pieces are cut from white, I just figured I would color it with a Copic. So this piece is for the eyes, and I just colored that with a black Copic versus just getting a piece of black paper out and cutting it again. And then I did the little dot with a yellow Copic marker as well. So for this fin, I can just trim it off. I only need the one side. Then I'm putting some glue all over the back of his head, and I will add the layer that is purple for the spots. Then I'll add the black one for his eyes, and then the white one for the teeth. I'm also using a pink Copic marker just to add a little bit more detail, adding some more dots around those purple dots. And then what I thought was really cute is Grace actually added some little, very subtle rosy cheeks. Now to add my little lure to his head, I just put a little dot of glue on that little piece at the end and just added that to the back. And then she used the fin that is the tail sticking straight up for a tail or a fin on top. I can add my little yellow dot for the light at the end of the lure, and then I'll add the two little fins on the sides. And I think he is really cute, flat too, not on a box. I just think that's really adorable. Now on her card, Grace did use the sentiment from the Anglerfish FlipFlop set that says a card to brighten your day. But I wanted to change mine up a little bit since I already used that sentiment. And I'm keeping the word smile and stamping "It's Your Birthday" at the bottom using stamps from the birthday offset saying stamp set. I've stamped this in some embossing ink, and I'm just adding some white embossing powder. Then I'll heat this up with my heat tool until it is nice and melted, and you get that bold, bright white sentiment. And this matches the die cut letters perfectly. So I'm going ahead and adding my sand to the bottom of my panel here. I'm ready to assemble all the things. And then I'm putting some foam adhesive all over the back of the panel with the opening so that it can be popped up from the panel in the back a little bit. You get a little bit of dimension. This will also give you a nice place to tuck that anglerfish. I'm going to go ahead and put all of this onto my card base, and since I use that outside in stitch rectangle, I get that really nice white border around all four sides. Now I can add my anglerfish and just tuck him right inside that little hole. I just think that is so cute peeking out of that den. And then I have my letters spelling out the word smile. These are die cut from white cardstock using Henry's ABCs. And I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue to glue each one of these down. Finally, because I always like to add glitter to my cards, I pulled out my Stardust stickles. I added some glitter to the light on the anglerfish, to the spots on his head, and a little bit to the top of my die cut letters. And then here is a final look at the card that I recreated today. This was so much fun to recreate. Grace, thanks so much for letting me make this. Now let's take a look at some of the cards from the design team. Audrey has this really cute card with the two anglerfish, and I love that little lobster peeking out from the bottom. Callie made a really fun light up card, so when you push that push here button, that light on the anglerfish lights up, which is so fun. Elise made a really fun card using the anglerfish paired up with a whole bunch of other fish and coral to create this really great underwater scene. And then Tammy's card uses that submarine and diver from You Are Sublime, and I just think that it is so cute. Lynette's card is really sweet. This is the one that inspired me to use the shells in my card today. And then Kara used those stitched ends to create a really cool three-dimensional look for her anglerfish back there in the deep depths of the sea. I love how Letitia kept her cards sweet and simple, and I love that scalloped frame framing up her little cute fish. And then here's a card from Jessica. It is a really fun light up card. When you push that button that says push here, both of those lights light up. Here's a tiny gift box from Kara. She did some really fun ink blending and splattering to create all kinds of texture on this really cool anglerfish. And Megan's card is so fun, using some more die cuts to create a little underwater scene. Here are some anglerfish gift boxes from Elena, and I love her pastel colors. I just think they are so pretty. Maureen created a fun card using the snow globe to look like an aquarium, and I just think that this is so cool. And then here is Grace's card that inspired my card that I created today. It is so fun, and thank you so much for letting me recreate it. And then here is a final look at that little anglerfish box that Rebecca created in today's video. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.